The presentation is going to be titled, "We Are in a Climate Emergency. It's Time for Truth and Honesty." So today's presentation will be different than what you're used to. When you leave Seneca, you're going to enter a system that is filled with contradictions and competing interests. A system that will force you to compromise and sacrifice on things that you never thought you would. And sometimes you'll want to scream, and sometimes you'll question your own perception of reality. And sometimes you'll just shake your head and ask, why don't people just tell me the truth? My goal here today is to share my insight, having worked in corporate sustainability and climate change for the last 15 years. So let's jump in and take a poll and see where everybody is. Generally speaking, do you think the story that we're being told by the corporate media and government on climate change is mostly true or false? And I categorize it as corporate media because corporations control so much of what we hear in the media. So this is a rapid fire poll. Whatever you think, just click quickly.
We'll just wait another 20 seconds. All right, get your answer together. 15 seconds.
Okay. 5 seconds. Okay. Now, my goal is to give you a choice to enter the system with your eyes open. Some people prefer not to know, and that's fine. Everybody has a different makeup of how they move through the world. Some may find my message unsettling. It might contradict your worldview. You may disagree with my interpretation of the facts, but rest assured, they are facts. I want to make sure that no one here wakes up in 20 years asking, why didn't anyone tell me? Well, I'm telling you today. Let's take another quick poll. Who should take the lead role to ensure that humanity has a future with a stable climate? No warming beyond 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius. Business, government, or civil society? Andrew, do I get to see the results of these?
You should. So when I close it down, I'll share it with everyone, and it should come up.
Okay.
So I'll close the poll, and then we wait 20 seconds.
I have to wait 20 seconds to see the results?
Yep, so we're at 15 seconds.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to wait this one out. What was the first one? I didn't see it.
I actually don't see the results on my end when I'm going through. I think you probably be able to know.
Well, everybody else can know.
Yeah, so I did apply and people should.
No answer. Oh, dear. Okay, good. Now, what I don't offer today is a quick fix or some trite reassurance that we're all on the right track, or some cliche that humanity has the ability to innovate and techno-fix our way out of our current predicament, just like we always have in the past. I offer truth and honesty. That's it. And a little advice. We have a broken system. A system where what happens in the tar sands is considered good economic business growth, good jobs. Where poverty wages are considered good for business. Keep wages down, profits go up, it's good. We're burning the Amazon is profitable because lumber is more valuable than an ecosystem or trees, living trees. This is good for business. This guy's not starting a union anytime soon. Child labor, and then possibly the worst problem of our system is the indigenous rights that are being stolen. So our system encourages and rewards the exploitation of people and nature. That's where the reward system is. Business and government are misleading us about climate change. There's no realistic plan to protect us. Our carbon budget will run out in 10 short years, and 2050 net zero, if you've heard that term, is a political and corporate target that cherry picks the science and that requires magic technologies to succeed. And just to go over a couple terms, if you're not clear, the carbon budget is a simplified way to measure the additional emissions that can enter the atmosphere if the world wishes to limit global warming to 1.5%. That's right out of the IPCC report. 2050 net zero is a strategy where emissions balance out at zero at some point around 2050. This ignores our carbon budget and removes the focus on reducing current emissions in exchange for a promise that in the 2040s and 2050s, negative emissions with technology that doesn't exist will restore the planet to net zero emissions. And just to clarify, negative emissions would be something like planting billions of trees, or the technology that is currently being thought about, a couple of pilot projects where machines are pulling carbon out of the atmosphere. But nothing like that exists in any scale at this point. So negative versus what we're doing right now, which is filling the atmosphere with carbon. If you think this sounds like a fantasy, you're not alone. Consider this analogy. We're on death row and we're being led to the execution room. You got your shackles on, you just had your last meal, maybe it's a poached salmon and dill sauce, or maybe a Big Mac and fries, chicken parmesan, something tasty. And you're heading down the hallway, but you have nothing to worry about because politicians and the corporate media tell us that there's an escape door further ahead. Well, it doesn't actually exist yet, but it's being built by the best people. Nothing to worry about. We're constantly reassured that we have time and that everything will be okay. It's not true. And I think we can see the evidence that it's not true. So let's start the presentation. There's 3 parts. This is part 1. We are in a climate emergency. It's time for truth and honesty. Okay. I recently had a conversation with a fellow sustainability strategist where it was suggested that the efforts of sustainability and CSR professionals, while not perfect, are based on good intentions. And that got me thinking. Are good intentions enough? What if those intentions are constrained from within a corporate culture that uses a self-serving interpretation of climate science to protect a lucrative but ecologically destructive business model? From within that type of culture, how can the good intentions of a dedicated sustainability professional possibly emerge? So what are they supposed to do? What's the responsibility of a sustainability professional who knows that their employer or client is using their wealth and corporate influence to mislead the public with an alternate environmental reality, one that downplays the urgency to act and where half measures and inconsequential efforts are spun as meaningful. Now, if the climate clock wasn't ticking, maybe none of this would matter. But it is. And once we pass the threshold, there's no going back or starting at a new normal. It will be a steady descent into systems failure, food scarcity, political chaos, and widespread suffering. So let's look. In the introduction from the gentleman from TD, he used the word meaningful. I'm very cued into that word. So positive versus meaningful. So there are two types of progress in the battle to protect our climate: positive and meaningful. And the distinction is crucial. A positive result is one that, no matter the degree, environmental harm is reduced. A giant clothing company that switches to organic thread would be considered to have made a positive change. And proponents of this approach will praise the incremental effort and assert how every little bit helps, or at least it's a positive step that can be built upon. But those responses ignore our looming reality. A meaningful result is different. It can be described as a dramatic reduction or the complete elimination of harm being unleashed on an ecosystem. In transferring harm from one place to another that is slightly less harmful is not a win and certainly not meaningful. In my research, I've been hard-pressed to find any sizable corporation that operates in this way, besides everyone's favorite Patagonia and possibly IKEA. But these corporations are still causing far too much harm considering the desperate climate challenge that lays before us. Now, analogies are a great way to see things more clearly, so consider this analogy. You're driving towards a cliff at 100 kilometers an hour. A positive change will be slowing down to 80 kilometers an hour, which will save you some time before you drive off the cliff. A meaningful change would be stopping and turning around. It's really just that simple. Let's use another analogy. When we look at infant mortality rates, we don't gauge success by an increase in access to medicine or an increase in the number of hospitals being built. Those are inputs. And they're very important. But what's most important is that we look and what we look at to gauge success are the number of babies who survive. That's the metric that matters. The output of the effort and the number of children that survive goes down. Then the effort failed. I'm going to say that again. The output of the effort is what matters, and if the number of children that survive goes down, then the effort failed. But we don't leave it there. We ask questions. We dig for more information so that we can make better decisions in order to achieve our goal and reduce the number of children who don't survive. But this is interesting. Something funny happens when we measure the success of corporate sustainability. We get distracted on the inputs and on things like pledges, promises, targets, goals, aspirations, declarations, initiatives, steering committees, working groups, and there's more. But that gives you an idea. We regularly fool ourselves that we're on the right track, even when there is ample evidence to the contrary. Every single major ecosystem on the planet is in decline, and CO2 keeps rising. Look at the results for corporate sustainability and compare it to how we gauge success for infant mortality. The only word to describe businesses' attempts to protect our ecosystems is complete failure. Take another look at the picture of the car. That's a positive effort that we're making right now. We must remind ourselves that change that doesn't change anything isn't really change. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that more than most, people involved in sustainability understand the science of climate change and that our carbon budget will expire in less than 10 years. And I'd also be prepared to gamble that they also likely understand that continuing to degrade ecosystems will make our ecological problems much, much worse. Today's heat waves, droughts, forest fires, and floods are not a new normal. It's a stark warning that our slide into climate chaos and large-scale global suffering. 1 degree of warming will become 2 and then 3. And we need to clearly understand that 2 is not twice as bad as 1. It could be 20 or 200 times worse. Positive feedback loops are nearly impossible to predict, but their impacts are coming, and they will shake every life-supporting ecosystem on the planet. Let's talk about the real world. If we could do anything we want to make the world a better place, I'm sure that each of us would have dozens of ideas. But for now, let's come down from the clouds and explore the challenge from the real world. Let's assume that internally, a sustainability professional is using all of their skills and influence to lobby for positive change. That's a great start. But the harsh truth is that in most cases, they're fighting a losing battle. Their voice is lost in a sea of pro-profit sentiment. At bonus time, most companies reward employees based on increasing profits, not on reducing environmental harm or building a new, less harmful business model that has new costs associated with it. And if anyone knows of a company that significantly rewards employees based on meaningful sustainability metrics, then please let me know. And I get it. You need your job. You need to provide for yourself and maybe your family, and you may even be paying off a big fat student debt bill. Ultimately, you're tied to the system, as we all are. If you speak out, you may get alienated at work, or you could even get fired, which could make it very tricky to get another job utilizing your special skill set. Although in some cases, it might be the perfect resume builder. Let's take another poll. And this time the question is, if you work for a corporation, can you do more good from within or externally? How long, Andrew?
We'll give it a moment. So we'll give another 30 seconds. Okay. All right. 2019.
All right. I guess we'll find out later.
Yeah.
So let's move on. Okay, here we go. Okay, so you don't call out your company or client, and instead you convince yourself that you're doing some good from within. But is that really true? Can you really fight against a predatory system that is ruled by short-term profits and ecological destruction by working with a company that strives to achieve short-term profits and ignores ecological destruction. And please don't tell me how every little bit helps, or at least it's a positive step that we can build on. Those responses ignore our looming reality and the difference between positive and meaningful change. Let's go to the real world and get some real world examples here after I look at these results. Okay. Let's talk about leadership at Coca-Cola. This summer, Coca-Cola Europe announced the replacement of plastic for six-packs with the can collar paperboard packaging solution. Coca-Cola considers this a sustainable and recyclable solution that is set to keep more than 18 tons of plastic from ending up in the world's oceans each year. Wow, that's awesome. Congratulations, Coca-Cola. This might sound impressive, but keep in mind that Coca-Cola is the largest plastic polluter in the world and produces 3 million tons of plastic packaging each year. Now, maybe you could get your head around what 18 tons would look like. I don't know, 1, 2, 50 swimming pools. But 3 million tons? I have no idea what 3 million tons is. It's a lot. So while 18 tons might sound like a lot, it's actually just a tiny fraction of all the plastic that they produce. 18 out of 3 million is a reduction of just 0.0006%. Framed honestly as a relative reduction, the efforts of Coca-Cola are inconsequential at best and misleading at worst. Perhaps this is why Coca-Cola spends approximately $4 billion a year on advertising. Now, regardless of what Coca-Cola says about sustainability, sales come first, before societal and environmental well-being. According to the longtime director of sustainability, B. Perez, getting rid of the plastic bottle is a non-starter as, quote, it could alienate customers and hit sales. The director of sustainability, getting rid of the plastic bottle is a non-starter as it could, quote, alienate customers and hit sales. That sounds a lot more like the director of marketing than sustainability. In effect, Coca-Cola is saying that they refuse to change their business model in a way that could dramatically reduce their use of plastic, and they're blaming it on their customers. But I suppose that if a company doesn't have to pay for the harm that they cause, and they have no real moral compass for societal well-being, then it makes sense to lobby against any meaningful change and resist finding a new way to sell their product. I have links in the article that I've written about this, and you can go look and see what their lobbying efforts have begun, that they've been involved with. So let's talk about placating corporations. I can understand why those employed at Coca-Cola would gush over these efforts. But what about the rest of us who don't work there and who can see this whole charade for the hoax that it is? What's our responsibility to the truth? Is there harm in providing a little visibility for yourself by posting a trite congratulatory platitude on social media? Well done, Coke. Nice work. Excellent work. Nice sustainability. It may only be a quick comment, but I think it's dangerous because it gives energy to a deceptive tactic and creates confusion and dialogue where none should exist. But perhaps even more insidious is that it pacifies us. It makes us think that someone else is on the job, taking care of climate change, and that's dangerous because it lulls us into a state of complacency. when instead you should be out in the streets demanding change. Now, at this point, I think it would be helpful to reflect on exactly what drives a corporation to behave the way it does. Simply put, they are sociopathic entities that exist in an increasingly deregulated economic system that entices and encourages them to exploit people and resources in their quest to accumulate as much capital as possible. Unless you think that corporations can be reasoned with or coaxed to do better, then placating them is not the answer. And knowing that your encouraging comments could be doing more environmental harm than good is probably reason enough to stop doing it. Part 2, the business case. Let's do another poll. Who's better suited to take the leadership role to address our global environmental challenges, business or government?
All right. We'll give it another 30 seconds.
Okay, I'll let you guys finish. I'm going to continue on. For decades, sustainability professionals have searched high and low for the elusive win-win business case. But the prize still eludes them, and with good reason. It doesn't exist. It's a neoliberal fantasy propped up by corporations and their government puppets designed to perpetuate the idea that all problems are best solved in the marketplace with minimal government involvement. This maintains corporate control over the economy. And now just think about what happened with COVID and who took the lead on addressing COVID, and how individual companies didn't have an incentive to prevent COVID from attacking a society. Only when they saw a business case for a vaccine or masks did they get involved. Something to keep in mind. We need to stop pretending that we're making progress and admit that corporate sustainability is simply the wrong strategy for our global, emphasis on the word global, environmental challenges. Yes, business has contributed to a wave of positive inputs going into the system, just like new hospitals being built and access to medicine for infant mortality. But in spite of those efforts, the output of the system is failing to reverse global deforestation, biodiversity loss, and ecosystem decline, not to mention a host of other social problems like income inequality, living wages, and food insecurity. The truth is that corporations exist in a system that provides little, if any, reward for solving global environmental problems. Most companies have a very narrow focus, and it's not in their interest to expend capital to address a global ecological problem like climate change or plastic pollution when no meaningful ROI exists. Our system simply doesn't reward companies for solving problems where the payoff is only societal well-being. And the results speak for themselves. And by now it should be obvious that degrading ecosystems is just not a problem that can be solved by each company, reducing their impacts one by one with the right sustainability strategy. Great efforts by one company won't make a dent in our collective challenge. We've been approaching this all wrong. Asking companies to play by an alternate set of rules was a failed strategy from the start. We have a systems problem that encourages business to destroy rather than to regenerate and protect. The capitalist system in which global commerce is conducted is destroying us. We need a new system. Capitalism was created by humans, which means that we have choices. It's time to ditch a system that works for so few at the expense of so many. A system that encourages greed and selfishness with financial windfalls. A system that preys on the weak and treats nature like a slave to be used and discarded. But we created this system, and we can change it. Imagine if we changed the system so that the rewards were determined by one's ability to create societal well-being. Imagine if instead of a system that worshipped society destabilizing concentrated wealth in the form of billionaires, it was designed to ensure that everyone received a living wage and had access to free healthcare and higher education. Imagine if the system were designed to create health and wellness rather than to toxify people's lives for the benefit of the 0.01%. Now, here's an important point. Companies would still be free to operate in this system without government interference. Oops. Got ahead of myself. But the new rules would change their focus. The metrics would be designed to reward companies that enriched society, while those that degraded it would become insolvent and fade away. Imagine how different a company like Amazon would be in this type of system, and how much it would enrich society, beyond just selling people stuff that arrives in one day. I'm going to say that again. The metrics would be designed to reward companies that enriched society, while those that degraded it would become insolvent and fade away. Amazon could be just as wealthy as it is today, but would be achieving different goals. And government would play a key role in this system. It would help to design and police the rules. It would spend tax dollars with the same goal of societal well-being, which would include supporting workers in this transition instead of giving money to corporations that have created much of the harm that we're trying to repair. Gone would be the days where government would set the rules for the benefit of the corporate elite and billionaires. Instead, the rules would serve ordinary people for the betterment of society. Wealth could still be created by innovative and creative minds, but it would be based on the new focus of well-being, because that's where the important metrics would lead. These simple systemic changes would have an immediate impact on millions of lives, not in 20 or 30 years when our fragile ecosystems would be well beyond their tipping points. Those corporations who find it difficult to adapt would fade away, and new companies that create well-being would take their place. There's no guarantees that your company should exist forever in capitalism. There would be no more need to chase shadows, looking for the elusive business case for corporate sustainability. The system, the overall system, would encourage positive change across the board. Now, the science clearly shows that we are now in the era of climate change. Last year, we reached 1.1 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. And recently, scientists reported that Greenland's ice sheet may have shrunk past the point of return, with the ice likely to melt away no matter how quickly the world reduces climate warming emissions. The various climate strategies that have been deemed appropriate by the corporate elite, fossil fuel-rich nations, and Davos billionaires all fail to accept the science. 2050 net zero is nothing but a watered-down political target to ensure that the system that created this mess remains largely unchanged. Today's heat waves, droughts, forest fires, and floods are not a new normal. It's a stark warning of our slide into climate chaos and large-scale global suffering, unlike anything we've ever seen. Positive feedback loops are nearly impossible to predict, but their impacts are coming, and they will shake every life-supporting ecosystem on the planet well before 2050. There's no more time for tweaks and promises. Our efforts are well below what is necessary to prevent our climate from heating up beyond 1.5 degrees Celsius. We must demand what's necessary, not what is politically feasible. The real timeline deemed sufficient by the science community is 2030. That's when our carbon budget will expire. It will be uncomfortable, but we have no choice if we want to avoid planetary chaos. Part 3. It's time for a gut check. Assuming that we agree with the science, each of us must look in the mirror and ask ourselves, what's the point of my efforts if they don't address our climate emergency in a meaningful way? And while you're talking to yourself in the mirror, you might also ask, why did I get involved in sustainability in the first place? Small changes in many areas can have extremely positive effects. But without changing the system that created our environmental emergency in the first place, it's far more likely that we'll continue to destroy our planet than magically reverse course. Our neoliberal inspired market-based attempts at finding solutions in the past several decades have resulted in steady ecosystem decline, taking us right to the edge of a massive systems failure. We've squandered the ability to approach this with incremental thinking. We need meaningful change, and in order for that to happen, we need to change the system. I'm going to bring in another analogy here. Until something changes, it seems very strange. It seems out of the ordinary. It can't happen. It's just a pipe dream. And that's what people thought back when there was slavery. Can't get rid of slavery. It's how the system works. And then all of a sudden, it changes. And then it becomes something that you can actually realize is true. We don't need that, and it's not right. Giving the women a right to vote around 1920 is when it all occurred. That was a crazy idea until it wasn't. So these ideas might seem crazy. The system's too big. We can't change it. But that's because we don't have an example of something different, and we are constantly being bombarded with news and media that tells us that this is the way it has to be. And that's not true. So where do each of us fit into this challenge? What role should we play? Let's start by asking if there's ever a reason why we should be loyal to a corporation or client while knowing that they are misrepresenting the truth about their efforts to address our ecological emergency. Or is that just business in 2020? I hope that's not just business in 2020. Is there a different standard when it comes to destroying the biosphere? Now, how does it work? How does it feel to work for a company like Coca-Cola, where two opposing realities need to exist simultaneously? How does that affect you personally? How much cognitive dissonance can you endure before that nagging discomfort will need to be addressed? It's time to get off the fence. We can't have it both ways. Either we're fighting for the climate in a meaningful way, or we're not. If you find yourself defending Coca-Cola or another corporation that is creating an alternate environmental reality, then it might be a good time to go back and sit with the question about your responsibility to this challenge and why you got into sustainability in the first place. It's decision time, and we need to ask ourselves where we want to be on this issue, especially those of us who know better, those of us who respect the science. If you want to argue the science with someone, I'm not the right person to do that with. The science is understood, and there's no debate. So we're going to do one more poll. It's our last one. Oops. Does the climate really need you to fight for it? or is our current approach working just fine? Remember that those with the power will fight with everything they have to maintain their wealth and control.
Great, give it a bit more time. Okay. 15 seconds.
Fight of a generation. The generation that fought World War II to stop the spread of fascism was known as the greatest generation. They fought with bravery and stubborn determination to protect everything that we cared about. Now imagine for a minute what the world would look like if they lost. What language would we be speaking? Who would be in charge? Would there even be elections? Would we be slaves or would we be free? Sometimes in life, the stakes are so high that winning is the only option. Well, it's 80 years later, and the current generation now finds itself in their own fight for survival. This time the enemy is not a country. The fight is against the ruling elite who guard and defend the plundering global economic system. This time we don't have to leave our homes to fight because, in a sense, we're already being occupied, not by another country, but by the rigged capitalist system itself. Every country on the planet is under its spell, and all but the 1% are victims of this occupation. It makes me think of the idea of trickle-down economics, and the idea that the windfalls for the rich trickle down to everyone else. And it's true, they do trickle down from the 0.0001% all the way down to the 1%. They don't fall much further, maybe the 2%, but that's about it. That was a great strategy if you were the ultra-rich or in the 1%. But for people living on wages that haven't gone up in decades, not so much. So we need to think differently about the battle for a stable climate. We need to reframe the fight as a battle against an occupying force that is destroying us. We need to mobilize against corporate greed and corrupt politicians to protect our climate and everything that we care about. We need to think of ourselves as the resistance. It's time to go all in. Imagine what we could do if we combined our passion, skills, and connections and went all in to defeat the ultimate destroyer, predatory capitalism. What if we framed the challenge as a fight for our lives, where everyone had an important role to play? What if instead of squandering our energy and skills on positive efforts that help corporations pretend that they're making meaningful changes, we focused on how to change the system that is at the core of the harm? What if instead of being silent when we heard governments and corporations talk about their efforts to achieve 2050 net zero targets, we called it out for the environmental fantasy that it is and corrected it with scientific reality? We have a big challenge. We have 10 years to decarbonize every aspect of our economy: transportation, manufacturing, energy production, agriculture, and our built environment. That's what we have to solve, not the six-pack reduction of plastic. That's a distraction. When FDR told the American people that it was time to fight the Germans and defeat fascism, he didn't say that they would get to it in 30 years. The timeline was now. And he engaged every single aspect of American society. And it wasn't only America, it was Canada and the United Kingdom too. We need to replicate this effort, but unfortunately, the corporate stranglehold on governments that favors market solutions is impeding that. In an ideal world, all governments would already be on a war footing, ready to implement the largest and most complicated economic and social shift in the history of our planet. We have the technology and the solutions are sitting on the shelf. There's only one thing standing in our way: corporate greed and control, which has infiltrated every aspect of our capitalism-soaked lives. So what can we do? Well, we all have an urgent role to play, everyone. Firstly, we don't placate business. We complicate it. We interfere with predatory capitalism from the inside and out. We interfere with it politically and logistically. We complicate it. We agitate it. If you need to keep your job, then you reveal the deceptions from within, covertly. We can all play a role, some big and some small, but everyone must work towards the same goal of bringing down the system that is destroying our planet. Secondly, we need to stop believing the lies of liberals and conservatives. Regardless of what they say, as a group, they are beholden to the corporate class. We must vote for Green Party candidates who can, emphasis, hopefully, launch a decarbonization, job creation, and climate justice plan immediately. And I say hopefully because politics and democracy is flawed for this challenge. It promotes discussion, which is great in most instances and most challenges. There's other articles I've written about this if you go and look for them. But we don't have time for discussion on this, unfortunately. We've squandered that opportunity. Now we just need action. Time is not on our side. We're getting closer to a cascading failure of interconnected ecosystems. This is a fight that we cannot lose. We must do everything possible to complicate and obstruct this evil force. We are the resistance, and like the greatest generation, we have no choice but to win. Thank you. Now it's your turn. Any questions or comments, please?
Well, thank you very much, Brad. I always like it when somebody is prepared to challenge the existing mindset which we operate under, and you certainly have done that. So I want to encourage our students to ask their questions, to probe, to point out their point of view. But let me begin with just a couple of comments or concerns here. One is our present sustainability strategy, if one can call it that, and which is predicated on the 17 admirable targets and goals of the sustainability development approach as promulgated through the United Nations. And it deals with a lot of essential issues: equity, poverty, hunger, gender issues, etc. But is it time to decouple the environmental conversation from all of those other broadly defined fields and necessary things, and tackle this as a particular, immediate, and all-encompassing challenge on its own right, as a specific area of dealing with the environmental imperative?
Is that for me?
Yeah, why not? Yeah, why not?
I don't think you can separate it. I think it's all interconnected. I think that land use and health and biodiversity, it's all interconnected with the climate. Climate justice would go a long way if we thought as a vision to create climate justice for all of the Earth's inhabitants. So I think that it's not a problem that we can isolate. I think we have to address it as one problem with many different aspects to it. And if we gave incentives and we had a system that incentivized less harmful behavior, it would likely become just standard that companies and governments would behave in this way. There are tools to change things.
We do have a question from a student, an observation. And that is, how can we, as sustainability professionals, what can we start doing in order to work on system change? Over to you, Brad.
Well, I addressed it somewhat in the presentation. Those were big concepts. I think the first step is accepting in your mind that this is the challenge and understanding that the positive efforts are not bringing about the changes we need. The next step is to talk to people, join groups, join organizations, join political organizations, whatever suits your personality. Politics is a big part of it. These are countrywide and global-wide challenges that are going to need different political solutions. Joining groups that lobby for change, and making personal changes yourself, because ultimately we're going to have to do things differently, every one of us, if we're going to move forward with a new system. And the things that we think we must have and that we come to rely on, like a reusable cup when we go and get a coffee, which we used to do pre-COVID, those are manufactured ideas of what we need. We don't really need to have a disposable cup when we go out in the morning. We can easily bring our own. So it's a mindset, and it's linking up with people who are working in this area, talking about these ideas. There's no one size fits all solution.
One of the questions asked by a student here is, how do we change capitalism without negatively affecting the economy, which of course provides us with jobs? And we know that the production it tackles, provides, also is associated with carbon dioxide releases. So, how does one, you've detected the problem, the student says, but he's not sure that the solution is realistic. How do you address that issue?
Right. That is a very pragmatic question, and it has to be asked. We have an economic system that is built on fossil fuels. We could make drastic changes immediately, where public transit would become the way to travel, where companies would pay large fines for doing more activities that are polluting. We give subsidies to the oil and gas industry to the tune of trillions each year. They don't have to pay for health care, asthma, even tax reductions. There are so many different things we can do to change this. It's in our power, but that's the simplistic narrative, talking point from politicians who are mostly looking out for their own power. I can sell the right-wing perspective. You're going to kill the jobs, you're going to kill the economy, we're going to have nothing. Well, I got news for you. If we don't do something, we're going to have that same outcome just a few years later, and we're not going to have any control over it because we're going to be dealing with emergencies and crises and jumping around trying to plug holes. So we have to solve it now, and we're going to have to take a little bit of a sacrifice. And it's not even a sacrifice. It's a reinterpretation of what is important and what is necessary in the way we live our lives. And I have an article, if you look it up on the internet, about how we have to how capitalism fosters this idea that doesn't allow us to even open our minds for the changes that we need. It's so ingrained in how we live.
Great. I think we have time for one more question, Bill.
Yes. Do you think that oil and gas subsidies should be ended by decreasing them year over year, or I'm going to take the logical step and saying immediately?
Well, I don't think there's a choice. I think they have to be discontinued immediately, and every single person who works in that sector needs to be given a portion of their salary for a period of time until the transition is made. That's how you deal with this problem in a proactive and meaningful way. You don't, if you're in your home and the bathtub upstairs is overflowing, you don't lower the stream of the water coming out. You turn it off. So we need to stop incentivizing this type of activity, and we need to defend the voters, the citizens who are going to lose their livelihood. They're nervous. They're scared. They'll vote for anybody who says that they're not going to be thrown out in the street. We have to take care of those workers. People in the C-suite, not so much. But the people who are working at these jobs, they need to be told that they're going to get 80% of their salary. I've written about this for the first 3 years, and then for the next 2 years, 70% of their salary. Government will offer them free courses, free incentives, everything possible to get these people into another industry so they're not reliant on something that's destroying the planet.
Well, thank you very much, Brad. I often think that this is as much a discussion about livability for humans as it is about destroying the planet. And the planet probably has billions of years to sort itself out still and to change, and for other living things perhaps to arise. But it may not have an opportunity for us. And if we took it a little more seriously, that's going to be the impact. It might address some people's qualms about acting immediately. I think it's an essential argument that you have made, and we very much appreciate you bringing that forward for us.